So let's do something new. Now what I'm going to show you is basically how you can use normal maps. So let's open up this file. And what I've done here is basically quickly set up a tiling texture. So if we look in the top view right here, you can see that we've got these rocks that I've just kind of placed in there randomly. And when I modeled these rocks, I basically took this edge row. Let's come down here, select that. Basically took this row of rocks right there, made those first, and then copied and moved those to this edge right here. That way I get a nice tiling map. I also did the same thing for the top row of rocks. Just made this top row first, and then copied those down exactly 512 units down to the bottom so that when I render this out, I get a nice tiling map. Now this background surface right here, this concrete, you can see that the length and width is 1024, so I'm just using standard units to kind of do the math so that I make sure that when I actually render this, I get a tileable map. And I've made a tileable concrete map, placed it on there, and then tiled it a couple times so that, you know, when I rendered this whole thing out again, I'm going to get a nice tiled, seamless map for everything. So, you can also see in this scene that I've got a plane sitting here above those objects that I've made see-through so we can actually see what we're doing. And on this plane, I have a projection modifier. And I've gone ahead and chosen to use the mortar, which is this object right here. And I've also chosen the stones, which of course are just those stones. And I don't have to adjust the cage at all. I've just kind of lifted it up off the surface. But now I'm basically going to project these objects onto this plane to create a tiling map that you could then use for an environment. Let's go ahead and open up rendering again. Render to texture. And again, you see that I've got my projection modifier here. It's already loaded in. My plane is selected. Let's go ahead and look at our options. So I've got my ray miss color set to red, but I'm pretty sure I won't get any ray misses, so I'm not too worried about that. I'm set in tangent space, going to the right and down. And I've also added diffuse map, normals map, and a height map. And I've set all of those to be 512. So before we render this, I'm just going to check where I'm rendering this to. I'm just going to go ahead and render this down to this folder right here. Go ahead and hit render and see what happens. So basically what you can see here is I've added a bump map to this texture, and it's rendering out the diffuse. It's basically rendering out the lit diffuse map, so I've really cranked up the bump on the shader. Let's open up that material just so you can see. There's the rock, and I've basically got a bump map in there, and I've got the value set fairly high. And my mortar, again, I've got a bump map in there. Nice thing about the projection system in Maxadet is it'll actually pick up the bump map that you have on an object. So for instance, if you've got a character, if you've got a high-res character and you've already made shaders for it that include a bump map, it'll actually pick those up and render it right into the normal map. So I'm going to go ahead and open that normal map so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's our normals map. You can see that that bump pattern got picked up into the normals map. It's a really nice thing, so you don't have to kind of futz with it over in Photoshop and try and layer things together. You can just, if you've got UVs on your high-res object and you put a bump map on there, it'll pick it up. And another thing that's really cool is if you actually put a normals map on your high-res surface, it'll pick that up as well. So you can actually take a really, really high poly object, render out your normal map to a medium poly object, put some bump on that, and then use that medium poly object to render out a normal map for your low poly object, and it'll still pick up the normals from the really, really high poly object. Let's go ahead and view the height map. So you can see here basically what I have is a grayscale map that is the height of the stones that we're seeing here. So I could use this height map in addition to the normals map in the game engine to get a really close illusion to having displaced stones. I could also use this height map right here along with Brazil 2 or Mental Ray or Renderman to render out micropoly subdivision displacement at render time. So this is a really great tool to use for if you're in doing film or cinematics. You can render out a normal map for your game and render out a height map for the cinematics. And then using Mental Ray and using their subdivision displacement in render, you can render the actual displaced geometry really, really fast with no penalty. Let's go ahead and look at that diffuse map. Here you can see what the actual diffuse color texture looks like. So we've got the stones in the mortar, all very straightforward, very easy, very simple to do. So it sounds like there's some kind of mysticism going on, but it's actually, the normal mapping stuff is actually very easy and straightforward and very easy to use in whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's games, film, television, if you're designing for the web. There's all sorts of different uses that you can use for render to texture and also for the normal maps and height maps.